Okay, there we go. Yeah, so turn in your chapter 1 outline. I had a few people email me as to what I was looking for. If you turn something in and it's not really what I was looking for, which is pretty open-ended, so that probably won't be the case, I'll let you know. But if you have any other questions as we go forward, feel free to ask. Again, this is to help you kind of prepare, so you've seen this information ideally before I go over it, but it'll be sort of a little bit lagging until kind of halfway through the semester. But at least you'll have looked at the chapter before I go over some of this terminology. I think that is all I wanted to talk about before getting into this. Okay, so we were talking about homeostasis as one of the kind of the main themes in AMP. It's really important that our bodies kind of stay within this happy range for a lot of different characteristics. Blood pressure, I think, is what I ended on. Is this where I ended? Do you guys remember? I think I went over blood pressure. It's kind of the same idea as temperature regulation. We want our blood pressure within sort of the same range. And I did not get to this. So these are some technical terms that we use when we talk about homeostasis. So there's sort of 3 parts to how our homeostasis works, 3 different, I guess, physical pieces that feed into keeping our body at this nice, happy medium. The first is going to be the receptor. So our body first has to sense some kind of change in the body. So the receptor is just what receives that information. So in the case of the blood pressure, I talked about those receptors above the heart. So the baroreceptors that will sense either a drop or an increase in blood pressure. So these receptors can be temperature sensors in the skin, for example, or something a little bit less well known, like those receptors above the heart. So receptor is taking in the information. So that information then has to go somewhere, right? So it heads towards the integrating or the control center. There's a lot of terms where there's more than one term in AMP for some reason. So I'll give you sometimes multiple terms for one thing in whether it's an area of the body or in this case sort of an overall part of the homeostatic mechanism. So you can call it integrating center or the control center. You want to know both of those terms because especially here, both of them are used interchangeably. This, as it sounds, is going to take that information and integrate it and then make a decision based on the receptor's information that it's sending in. So the receptor sends information to the control center, which is usually our brain. Sometimes it's like the spinal cord, but usually the brain is our control center. That's what is processing all of this information and then sending out the signal to make a change. And then finally, we have the effector. So the effector is what actually makes the change. So these are just the 3. It's kind of a straightforward way to break down how a homeostatic mechanism works. So the effector is the cell or the organ in most cases that's going to carry out that action. So to raise the blood pressure, for example. So the heart in this case, if we're still talking about the blood pressure example, the heart is going to receive the information from the brain to start increasing its rate to bring the blood pressure back up. So receptor or sensor. I don't think I had sensor on the first slide. Sorry about that. So receptor or sensor.
I have, we can't see the slides.
Oh, I'm sorry. See, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for telling me that. Okay, so receptor or sensor takes in the information, the integrating or control center processes it and sends out a message to the effector to do something about it if the homeostasis is a little bit off. Okay, I'll stop there for a minute since I forgot to advance the slide on Zoom. Sorry, guys. Oh, yes.
These are on Canvas, right?
What's that?
Are these on Canvas?
Yes, these are on Canvas. So again, yeah, just as a reminder, you don't have to write down every single word that's on the slides because these are all on Canvas. So just like that note-taking strategy document that I handed out in class, but it's on Canvas if you haven't looked at it yet. Don't waste your time writing down all these words, just add to it. So write it down in your own words if you want to, but don't just copy. I know it seems like that's kind of the easy thing to do and what you should do, but it's really sort of a waste of time, and you won't be able to keep up probably in class. So yeah, good question. I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you. All right. So on to sort of, this is a helpful graphic in the sense that it gives you those three technical terms that apply to any homeostatic mechanism. And then on the right side, you have the example of body temperature regulation. So for you guys on Zoom, here we have those three technical terms I just went over, whoops, and then the body temperature regulation. Example. So we have the sensor. In the case of body temperature regulation, that sensor are just nerve cells in our skin and our brain. So sensing the change in temperature, whether it's internal or external. And then the control center is going to be the regulatory center, temperature regulatory center in the brain. So those nerves are going to send messages to the control or integrating center of the brain. And then the brain will send information out to the sweat glands, which are just one of the effectors of the temperature regulation in the body. So that's a nice simple breakdown of those three different aspects of the homeostatic mechanisms. And I mentioned negative and positive feedback loops, and you guys kind of grouped up on, what was it, Friday, to talk about an example and in more detail about negative feedback. So as a reminder, negative feedback loops are what are controlling our homeostasis. Positive feedback loops don't keep us within this nice happy range. A positive feedback loop basically leads to greater and greater response in the same direction. Negative feedback loop brings that response kind of back into towards the set point. So that's a simple breakdown and a reminder of the difference between negative and positive feedback. I think the next slide, I'm showing you an example of positive feedback. I talked a little bit about it. A really commonly used example of positive feedback is basically during labor. So labor is a good example of a positive feedback loop. And I don't think we'd consider the process of labor homeostatic mechanism. We're not trying to stay within this happy medium range. We're trying to get a baby out of the body, which is the self-amplifying cycle that I'm talking about here. So a positive feedback loop is basically, I put it in bold here. The idea behind it is that change produces more change in that same direction. So if we're thinking about the process of labor, that means as the uterus contracts to push the baby into the birth canal, that's going to signal to the brain to actually cause further uterine contraction, to push the baby further down the birth canal and eventually out. So childbirth is a really good example of that positive feedback loop. Blood clotting I talked about as well. That's another one that probably more people have experience with. And then a couple others here for your information that we won't really go into: protein digestion and then nerve signal generation. So does positive feedback versus negative feedback make sense to everybody? Okay. We're going to focus mostly on homeostasis in here. In a lot of ways, we'll talk about some positive feedback cycles, but for the most part, we're talking negative feedback because homeostasis is where we want the body to stay most of the time. All right, on to the next theme, which is, I talked about this a little bit on Friday, the levels of organization within the body. So I talk about this in a number of different classes because it's sort of an underlying theme of a lot of biology. Essentially, you can break us down into atoms or build us up into one entire organism, one entire human. So we're going to be looking at these different levels as we go through the semester, starting at the small level. Kind of atoms, molecules, and then into organelles and macromolecules. So what I want you to know from this is basically this hierarchy that starting with atoms and working all the way up to an organism. So we have the smallest piece of matter that we're going to talk about is the atom. We're going to go into a little bit of chemistry to kind of catch everyone up on how atoms function and bond with each other, which is hopefully some review from general bio if you've taken that. Atoms are going to form molecules, so a bunch of atoms coming together make a molecule. A bunch of molecules coming together can make a macromolecule, a big molecule. So these are like proteins and carbohydrates and nucleic acids and lipids. So we'll talk about those again pretty briefly. Those coming together can form organelles. So we hopefully remember cells, at least our cells within them have all these little tiny organs or organelles. So a bunch of organelles put together make up a cell. A bunch of cells put together make up a tissue. Tissues can do things that cells can't. Cells can do things that organelles can't. So we're getting more and more complicated, obviously, as we rise in this hierarchy. A bunch of tissues together form organs. Organ systems are made up of multiple organs working together for a common function. And then all of our organ systems put together make one human being. So know those different levels and know sort of the trajectory from simple to complex. And we'll be focusing for the next few weeks sort of on this level, so up to the cell, but then we're gonna get into tissues and into more sort of large scale AMP. Questions so far? That's hopefully mostly review for you. I put some definitions here. I sort of already defined them, so I'm going to move through this pretty quickly. But these are the areas where we're really going to focus a lot of our time. Like I said, we'll do some review of chemistry, so like atoms and how they bond and what macromolecules are, all of that stuff. But we're really going to focus on cell up to organ system, which is a really wide range. So you guys will look at cells and talk about sort of them as the basic unit of life. So everything that's alive is made of cells. Anything below a cell, we don't consider alive. So an atom is not alive, a molecule is not alive. You have to be at least one cell to be considered alive. And then tissues. So tissues are a bunch of cells working together. Like I said, they perform a very specific function. You guys are going to learn all about the tissues, and I'll talk a little bit more about them in a few slides. Organs, multiple tissues working together, organ systems, multiple organ systems working together. Okay, I think I've said that enough times. So that's sort of our focus for this semester, cell to organ system. And just as a really quick review, there are two main kinds of cells. There's the prokaryotes. So those are sort of the, you can think of them as the bacteria. So single-celled organisms. They don't have, for the most part, any organelles other than ribosomes. Everything's just kind of swishing around in the cytoplasm. We really won't be focusing on them unless we're talking about some kind of bacterial-based disease. For the most part, we're talking about eukaryotic cells because we're eukaryotic organisms, which means we have all these little organelles within our cells that do very specific functions. So we have a nucleus, we have mitochondria to produce energy, we have the endoplasmic reticulum, ribosomes, and we'll go through all of these again when we go through the cell. So we're focusing on eukaryotes. I just wanted to remind you guys of these two main cell types. And tissues. So this is probably new to you guys. Oh. Okay. These tissues you're going to be really familiar with in a few weeks, maybe more than a few weeks. We are going to be going into detail on the 4 main tissue types in the human body. And this is usually new for most people. It's there's a lot of detail and it can be kind of difficult, but for now, all you need to know, if you can commit these 4 tissue types to memory, you're doing good so far. So we have these 4 main types of tissues. There's many subcategories within these tissues that we'll talk about. But for now, just know these 4 types of tissues that make up the human body. that make up the organs, that make up the organ systems, that make up the human body. So connective tissue is throughout our body. It's connecting muscle to bone, tendons to bone, ligaments to muscle, etc., holding our organs in place, all of that. So connective tissue is kind of holding us all together. It's connecting us. Epithelial tissue is essentially lining our internal cavities and then part of our external kind of part of the skin. So epithelial tissue, muscle tissue, very obvious. There's a few different kinds, but you can think of it as your skeletal muscles, your biceps, your hamstrings, all of that is made up of muscle tissue. And then nervous tissue is just within the nervous system. It's sending signals all over the body constantly. So we'll talk about them in that order this semester. So we'll talk about all the tissues at once, but then first talk about connective tissue into epithelial, and then talk about all the muscles in the body, and then all of the nervous tissue, the nervous system. All right. Oops. Into organ systems. So we'll be talking about these in lab this week as well. We are not going over all of these organ systems in AMP1. We are covering basically 4 of them. We're splitting the musculoskeletal into muscular and skeletal. So sometimes they work very closely together, obviously. So muscular and skeletal systems we'll consider separately. Doesn't really matter here. But all of the other systems will be covered in AMP2. So we're only covering a small subset. We kind of have to do a little bit of intro material, like some chemistry, some cellular stuff, all of that, before getting into any of the organ systems. So that's why we cover a few less in AMP1. But we'll talk about the integumentary system, which is the skin, hair, nails, all of that, the outer covering of our body. The nervous system will be at the end of the semester, like I just said. And then muscular and skeletal systems are sort of right in the middle, I guess, towards the last half. So from this, I'm going to go through each of the organ systems. So for now, from this lecture, I want you to have a good understanding of, know the names of all of the organ systems. So 11 or 10, if you want to combine this. I usually separate them out, but however you want to think about them, that's fine. So know the names, the main organs, and I'll point those out on the next few slides. And then also the main functions. So that's a lot of information about each of them, but that will give you a good overview of the organ systems of the body and sort of how they work.
Can you repeat that again, of what we need to know?
So what you want to know is the name of each of the organ systems, the main organs associated with them, and then the main functions for each one. So like I said, I'm going to go over it here one by one, organ system by organ system. And then in lab, you'll have a chance to work on it some more, just to sort of start to commit it to memory, because it's a lot of information. Okay. So this is a good table reference to come back to. There's a great one in your lab manual as well. All right, so let's go through each of these at a fairly superficial level. So not going to get into a whole lot of detail. I put the bullet points here that I think are important. So there's a lot more that goes into these organ systems. But I've put the important organs as well as they're noted on the diagrams, as well as the main functions. Okay. So first, the integumentary system. This will be one of the first ones we go over. It obviously encloses our internal body organs, and it helps protect against pathogens. So it's fighting off, any bacteria that are trying to make their way into our various organs. This is hair, skin, nails. Really, skin is the main one for the integumentary system. The skeletal system, pretty obvious, that's our bones. It's really all you have to know. Sometimes people throw in tendons and ligaments, but bones for the skeletal system. it allows us to move and helps support our body. So we're upright and not just some glob on the floor. The muscular system also obviously helps with movement, which is why a lot of times it's just considered the musculoskeletal system. I think it makes sense to separate it because they're very different parts. So the muscular system enables movement. So we can walk and talk and blink, all of those things. The muscles, the skeletal muscles, are the main piece of the muscular system. That's pretty easy. The muscular system also helps maintain our internal temperature. So it creates heat for us and keeps us from going into hypothermia. Onto the nervous system. The main parts of the nervous system are going to be the brain and spinal cord. So those are the two main parts. There's also all these nerves coming off of the spinal cord. So we have nerves going into pretty much every part of our body. So the nervous system both detects and responds to sensory information. That's the point of the nervous system. Okay, so those are the first four of our 11. This is split into two just because there's the male and female reproductive systems are different, but the reproductive system is one organ system. Just depends on if you're talking about males or females. So the whole point of the reproductive system is obviously to make more individuals, more humans. So to do that, the reproductive systems make gametes. So gametes are, in males, that's the sperm cells, in females, it's eggs. And then the reproductive systems are also really important in growth and development. So they'll produce a lot of the hormones that create typical female and typical male characteristics. So growth and development, as well as obviously producing new humans. So reproductive system. The endocrine system is one that often kind of gets forgotten about. It's easy to remember like the respiratory system, the cardiovascular, we think of those. Endocrine really deals with hormone secretion. So it's sort of an unseen organ system. It's secreting hormones that help regulate our bodily processes. So it helps regulate our metabolism. That's a huge one. So you may have heard of the thyroid gland, which is in your neck. And many people have issues with the thyroid gland functioning correctly, which can throw off metabolism, which can lead to weight gain, weight loss, depending on which way that error occurs. So the endocrine system, regulation of all of our body processes through hormones. And you'll hear me mention hormones a lot throughout the semester, and I won't really define them officially until, gosh, probably almost the nervous system. Hormones are just chemical messengers. So they're chemicals in our body that send messages to different organs telling them what to do. Other important parts of the endocrine system, the main organ, like the big organ, is the pancreas. And adrenal glands above the kidneys are also really important. So glands are considered organs, even though they don't really sound organ-like, but glands we put in the category of organ. So adrenal glands we'll come back to when we talk about, again, the nervous system. They have a huge role in the nervous system, but they're two little glands sitting on top of your kidneys. And then back to the reproductive systems. So here we have sort of an interaction between two different organ systems, which occurs across a few different organ system combinations. But the parts of the reproductive system also function in the endocrine system, which would be the testes and the ovaries. They're releasing a lot of hormones, and that helps with bodily maintenance as well. So growth and bodily process maintenance. So they kind of go between the two. Cardiovascular system, I think pretty much everyone is fairly familiar with. This is the heart and the blood vessels. Oxygen and nutrients are being delivered throughout the body via the cardiovascular system. And this, like the muscular system, helps maintain our internal temperature. Okay, so we're almost done. Just a few more. A few of which are really easy and straightforward. The lymphatic system is not necessarily one that people think of, kind of like the endocrine system. The lymphatic system deals a lot with fluid balance in our body. So from your blood vessels, fluid is sort of constantly leaking out of your blood vessels. So the lymphatic system, all the lymphatic vessels throughout our body, basically grab onto that and put it back in the blood. And then the blood will take it where it needs to go. If it needs to be excreted or it needs to go to a particular organ, that's what the lymphatic system's goal is. It also plays a really important role in the immune system. So in our immunity, defense against pathogens. So the main organs here are going to be the spleen, which is this kind of sickle-shaped organ just to the kind of upper side of your stomach. And then lymph nodes. I think most people have probably heard of lymph nodes. They are really important when it comes to the immune response. All right, the last three are really straightforward and you're probably fairly familiar with them. Respiratory system, it helps us breathe, it brings in oxygen and kicks out carbon dioxide. We'll get into why that matters at a cellular level. With cellular respiration, we get into the cell chapter. Main pieces here are going to be the lungs, obviously, and the trachea. So the trachea is what brings, it's the pipe that brings air into the lungs. Digestive system processes food. There's a lot of organs involved in the digestive system. So the main ones I would consider are the stomach, the liver, and then the two intestines. So large intestine, small intestine, stomach, pretty straightforward, and then the liver. So all of those are processing food, taking the nutrients and sending them where they need to go, and then excreting anything that's not needed. Another excretory system is the urinary system. So this is our last organ system. Thank you for bearing with me through all of this. I know it's a lot of detail. Urinary system helps control water balance in the body. Kind of similar in a way to the lymphatic system. In this case, however, the urinary system is removing nitrogenous waste, so nitrogen-based waste, urine, urea, from the body. The kidneys and the bladder are the two main ones. So the kidneys are going to filter the blood for any of those nitrogenous wastes, send that to the bladder, and then it can be excreted from the body. And that is a quick rundown of the 11 organ systems. Like I said, what I want you to get from this is really just an overview, because we're not going to go into all the details. You'll see it again in lab, so don't worry if it seems like a lot right now. Just be familiar, like I said, with the names, organs, and functions. That's a lot, I know. Any questions about those? Okay. So now we're going to get into something that gives a lot of people a good bit of trouble. We're going to start getting into a lot of the terminology that's used by people who study the human body as well as medical professionals. And this is going to be different. First off, we're going to do different regions of the body, sort of from an external perspective. We'll get into some internal divisions of the body. We probably won't get to that today. That'll happen on Wednesday. So right now, this is sort of, picture it as sort of a map of the body. It's a lot of new terminology. The reason I want you to learn this now is because it's going to help you later. So a lot of the regions here, the bones and the muscles, or parts of the bones and the muscles, are named after these regions. So if you get these regions kind of solidified in your memory, when you learn all of the muscles and all of the bones, it's going to make it a little bit easier. You'll recognize some of the terms by that point. So what I'm going to do here, I know this is kind of small. Hopefully you can mostly see the words. Can you guys see in the back? Okay, you may not be able to see them perfectly, but I'm going to go through each of them. I want you guys to take notes on them, whatever helps you remember where they are. Write down any notes you want. try to remember as many as you can. So try to push them in your brain right now. And then I'm going to hand out a blank diagram. This isn't graded, so it's just kind of a self quiz. You're going to put away your notes and see how many you can actually put on that blank diagram. So this is a fairly, there's nothing super exciting about going through this. So I sort of want to force you to pay attention as much as possible. And then you're going to go through and try to write down as many as you can remember. The more you get now, the less you have to remember later. So we will, and then you'll pair up and kind of fill in what you couldn't fill in and see how you do with that. So focus as much as possible over the next 5-ish minutes, and then we'll see how much you can remember. Okay, ready? Here we go. Some of them are really easy, some not. So cranial, that's pretty easy. That's kind of the skull head area. And then frontal, the frontal region is the forehead. So the frontal bone, you'll learn that eventually, is the forehead bone. Orbital or ocular, those are kind of used interchangeably for the eye. Buccal is cheek, B-U-C-C-A-L, the buccal area. Nasal, nose, that's easy. Oral, mouth, those are two really easy ones. The chin is the mental region, which sounds, you would think that would be head. Mental, the mentum is the chin. So mental is chin area. Moving into the torso, you have the thoracic, which is just kind of the chest in general. Sternal region is the breastbone. So the sternum is that bone that's really hard right up in your chest area. The armpit has a name. It's the axillary region. So if you've ever heard taking your axillary body temperature, you'll see that sometimes. It just means taking your temperature in your armpit rather than your mouth. Over here we have acromial. So acromial is going to be the shoulder area. There's part of your scapula that's called the acromion. So that will come in handy if you remember acromial and you see acromion, you know at least we're in the shoulder-ish area. Mammary is the breast. That's easy to remember with mammary glands. Okay, moving into the arm. The upper arm is brachial. So anything brachial is referring to the upper arm. The lower arm is going to be antebrachial. So brachial and antebrachial. The upper and lower leg also have different names. They're not all just leg. So brachial, antebrachial. The front of the elbow has a name, the antecubital. So anti usually means in front of, and here I should point out, when you see a diagram of someone standing like this is called the anatomical position. So when we talk about different directional terms, we're talking about it as if someone is standing with their palms forward like this and their feet facing forward. So this is anatomical. So antecubital means the front, ante is front of the elbow. Some of these root words will kind of help you, hopefully, even if you don't remember all of them. And then the antebrachial, like I said, is the forearm. So it's sort of, I guess, in front of or ahead of the brachial part of the arm. The wrist is the carpal region. So if you've heard of carpal tunnel syndrome, that's your wrist, right? So that should be fairly easy to remember. Onto the hand, we have the palm of your hand is the palmar region. That's pretty easy. And the thumb and the big toe have their own names. So the thumb is the pollex and the toe is the hallux. Sounds sort of similar, but they get their own names because they're special. The rest of the fingers and the toes are either phalangeal or digital. So those terms are used intermittently for fingers and toes, so there's no difference there. Okay, into the abdomen. I think I got everything there. So the abdominal region is kind of most of the abdomen. The umbilical region is specifically the belly button. Moving down, we have the pelvic region, which is kind of this narrow region just below the abdominal. The pubic region is right below that. On either side of the pubic region is what's called the inguinal or the groin region. So inguinal is often tough to remember, but it'll come back up when you're learning the muscles and the bones of the pelvis. So pubic and then inguinal on either side. And then the hip area is called the coxal region, C-O-X-A-L. Okay, I think I got the upper body mostly. Into the legs. So the upper leg, the bone there is called the femur. So that's the femoral region. So femoral. The knee is the patellar, specifically the kneecap, but generally the knee region is the patellar region. And then the front and the back of the calf have a different name. So the front and the back of the thigh are the same, they're femoral. The front of the calf or the shin is the crural. It's really hard for me to say, C-R-U-R-A-L. The back is called the sural or S-U-R-A-L. They rhyme, but they're really easy to get mixed up. So curl and sural. The back of the knee, so the front of the knee is the patellar, back of the knee is popliteal. It's a really weird word, but I really like it. So I'll probably ask you about it. Popliteal is the back of the knee. Moving down into the ankle, it's the tarsal region. So ankle is tarsal. Then we got the toes already. If we go over here underneath the foot, the sole of the foot is plantar. So the palm of the hand is palmar, sole of the foot is plantar. The heel is calcaneal. In general, the whole foot, if you refer to the whole foot, it's called pedal or pedal. The whole hand is called manual. Got all that. The butt is referred to as gluteal, like your glutes. And then up into the back. So in general, the back is referred to as the dorsal region. So just dorsal overall. Below that is the lumbar region. So if you guys know, if you've ever heard of lumbar issues with like lower back, so that's lumbar. Below that, you have the tailbone region. That's the sacral. Sacral region is the tailbone. It's tiny, but it gets its own name. The back of the elbow is the olecramal or olecranal. So the back of the elbow and the front of the elbow are really hard to remember, at least for me. So that's something you want to note which ones are kind of hard for you to remember from this exercise that we're about to do, because those are the ones you need to focus on remembering. Cranial is pretty easy, like I said. Okay, I think that's everything. Oh, we have up here, the otic is the ear. Sorry, forgot about the ear. Otic region. Cephalic refers to the head overall. And then cervical is the neck. So you'll see cervical a lot. There's cervical nerves, cervical muscles, anything that is dealing with, obviously, head positioning is really important. So we have a specific name for the cervical region. Okay, you ready? So put away your notes, and then you guys on Zoom, for you guys on Zoom, this blank diagram is on Canvas. So if you'll go to Canvas and open it up, you may not be able to type directly on it, but if you can at least sort of, even in your notes, kind of fill it in as best you can, that would be helpful, and I'll put you guys in breakout groups. So let's go on to the next so you guys don't have that anymore. Stop share. All right, so I'm going to put you guys in groups. Oh, wait, not yet. You're going to fill it out on your own first, and then I'll put you in breakout rooms. Bad. So sorry for you guys on Zoom, but just do the best you can with that blank diagram. It's under modules. Great, so fill your notes. Like I said, you can grade it, so no pressure. It's really just to help you see how much you're getting. And it's not the same diagram, so it doesn't line up perfectly. I apologize for that. Couldn't find the blank version of this diagram. All right, so take just a couple minutes. We're kind of running out of time, but fill in as much as you can. All right, so go ahead and pair up you guys in class. Just find someone nearby to you and see if you can fill in any blanks that you couldn't remember some of the terms for. And then you guys on Zoom, I'm gonna put you in breakout rooms and you guys do the same thing. So figure out kind of what areas you needed help with. There we go. Okay, just take a couple minutes. Like on here and like the names. So lower back is lumbar. And then umbilical, so where your umbilical cord attached. I'm not totally sure. I think it's just. Yeah, that's probably that. Yeah, so that was just a valid. Okay, yeah, don't worry so much about that. It doesn't line up. Yeah, that diagram. Are you guys doing? Pretty good? Good, yeah. Your question is ready. Your axis is XOB front, yeah. So chest, yeah, and then dorsal will be back. Yeah, so these lines don't necessarily line up with that diagram, so this back piece here. Yeah. Oh, but that's like. Oh. Okay, so just to wrap up, let me get these people out of the group. Okay, I'm closing the rooms, guys. Well, in 60 seconds. All right, so I'm gonna put this back up here so you can kind of look and see if there were any that were driving you insane. anyone have any questions about any of these? I know I came around and kind of asked, but hopefully that helped you. And I want to point out that quizzing yourself is one of the best ways to learn this material. So doing these kinds of quizzes on your own is going to help you a ton when it comes to exam time. So did anyone get, how many people got about like 50% on their own, would you say? Few, yeah. And if you didn't, that's totally fine. So yeah, it is tough. This terminology is tough, and we're going to go into more on Wednesday. So try to set up quizzes for yourself somehow, whatever works the best. We'll be going over this in lab again this week, so you'll be able to quiz yourself again. Yeah, just try to commit this to memory, and it'll help you in the long run when we start learning a lot of other new information. And that's it. I'll see you guys on Wednesday, or lab maybe before then. Yeah.
Okay, so did y'all meet Friday?
Yes.
I heard you say, okay, so I'm just confused. Okay, so.
Yeah, I remember you emailing me.
No,